there seems to be a lot of good Justin Fields tape from this past game. What did you see?
I thought he did a really good job. I think it's just more the same that we've grown to expect, which is explosive plays in the run game, explosive plays when he starts to scramble, give these guys a chance to compete down the stretch. Unfortunately, we are seeing, there's interceptions at the end, right? The one at the very end, to me, is not a big deal. You're trying to force the ball down the field because, you're in catch-up mode. That one's not as bad. The curl route, to me, is kind of half him, half the receiver, right? We need to fight back down our stem a little bit more, but simultaneously, we've got to see, the corner's leverage and not leave it inside. So I do think there's stuff to improve, but I mean, you really got to give this Bears team credit. It feels like every single week it's coming down to the end of the game. And when you look at a team with as much cap space as they have, the fact that they're as competitive as they are, to me, is really a good sign for the young quarterback.
When we talk X's and O's, I know we rarely discuss who the people are representing the X's and O's. And yet, especially at the NFL level, who that guy is to whom you're throwing matters. That trust in that relationship and the trust in someone's skill matters, or the lack of trust matters. How do you coach that? How do you coach past this idea of, well, yeah, that's a guy who his catch radius in this situation, he's down there somewhere, he's going to go get it. This guy, even though that might be open, how much processing should go on knowing the differences between talent levels of some of these guys who are going to catch the ball?
Yeah, I mean, the ideal world would be that everyone could pull their weight, right? But that's not reality. We see it in our jobs, and we see it especially on Sundays where, hey, there are guys that can elevate and do a little bit better job than someone else. I think when you're talking about how do you coach that from the quarterback perspective, a lot of that is what factors into those backside one-on-one matchups. When you talk about, hey, we have three receivers to one side, we have a receiver backside, a lot of what he does best comes down to, first you say, okay, route selection. Hey, what does Cole do really well when we ISO the tight end backside? Okay, what does Mooney do really well? Okay, what about Chase? What does he do really well? So those are when you're talking about, hey, we're going to select those backside one-on-one routes. And then simultaneously, the next step of that is what you were talking about is how does it factor into the whole read, which is, hey, I know I've got this guy in this basic in cut, but he doesn't do a great job bodying people up. And listen, it's quarters coverage, which means the safety is going to fly downfield, and we're going to have to body him up. So, hey, maybe I get off my basic early and get to the cop route. Those are things that you're going to have to work on really in the offseason. It's going to come through self-study, I think. When Justin sits down in January and says, okay, into January, what did we do well he's going to watch the whole season, right? Okay, this guy did really good on this route. Hey, maybe I need to try to, get Chase the ball in these situations. Hey, maybe I missed Cole on a couple of these and I need to speed up my feet here. So that to me is really going to come in the self-study and then kind of grinding it throughout next year's OTAs and training camp. The way you kind of bandage it in season, honestly, is those backside one-on-one routes and kind of minimizing what they can really select at the line of scrimmage with certain guys. But really, a lot of that's going to come this offseason.
Tim, what do you see as evidence of growth in the passing game for Fields from this particular game?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I think he's doing a really good job with progressions. Every time I put out a Twitter clip about, hey, man, he's not a one read and go guy, people get real mad. I don't know what it is with Chicago. Like, there might be some self-loathing in the fan base where it's like, no, yeah. I'm like, I'm waking up, I'm hitting the Peloton at like 4:30 in the morning, Colorado time, and I've got people real mad at me in Chicago that how dare you? The crosser was open. And I'm like, bud, the crosser was not open when he hits the top of his drop, so he moves on to the cop route. But there's a radio guy up there, Mike North. He was real mad, and I tried to handle it gently. I tried to handle it gently because, like, listen, the first thing in his bio was he was born in 1952, and if my grandpappy's on Twitter roasting somebody, I hope they handle him gently, and I tried to. He got real mad about it. So, yeah, like, listen, his progressions are doing really well. Which to me is the growth that everyone wanted to see and what everyone trashes him about. It's just not it's not applicable. Where we need to see him improve is his footwork. And that's what I tried to talk about on the tape this week was, listen, we've got to speed our feet up. It's not the broad, somebody just saying, oh, his footwork's bad. Like, that's not a real criticism. NFL quarterbacks have really good feet. It's play-specific footwork. It's altering. Hey, there was a great example. The ball that he sails to the tight end working a spear route that almost gets intercepted early in the game. He takes a lackadaisical, what we would call a zone 6 drop, right? It's power footwork. He's just taking zone 6. He needs to either take a lackadaisical 4, like Brady used to do with the Patriots when he'd hit Gronkowski, or take a speed 6. Those are the kind of nuanced things he needs to improve this offseason that will take his game to the next level. But I just think progressions-wise, I think he's doing a really good job.
I'm noticing almost on every play, there's that hesitation that he's being coached to show the possibility of designed run early, almost no matter what. Is it working?
Yeah, they do a ton of, we call them flash fakes where you see he sticks the ball out and kind of rides the back. We call those flash fakes. It's kind of more or less what we want to impact is the linebackers, right? Because the safeties aren't going to be impacted by that because they're going to be impacted more by run fit, the receiver kind of stock blocking them. So the safeties, DBs, we're not worried about it. But those flash fakes, we want to freeze the backers. And the answer is heck yeah, man, because we're hitting these digs behind. We're hitting some daggers. We're hitting a little bit of like the bender post right behind the linebackers. A lot of that has to do with that little bit of a flash fake before he drops. He keeps those guys at 5 or they step up to 4.5, and then we can sneak somebody behind them. So I think they're doing a really good job with it. I think Justin's really natural with it. You could go back to high school and you've seen him do stuff like that. So I think part of it's, hey, it's comfort level for him too. But I do think it's a really good wrinkle they're adding. And I think it's only going to get better when they start to get more exotic with the formations, like getting Claypool inside to the slot, right? Every once in a while, you'll invert those guys, bump Claypool to the slot and have him run the bender. Kind of like the Packers used to do or still do sometimes with the Lazard, where they move his bigger body into the slot and they kind of run him on that seam. They'll be able to do stuff like that with Claypool next season that I think will be really exotic and I think it'll be fun. And then adding that flash fake will really help those concepts open up.
I would love to know, we were talking about this after the game on Monday, Tim. I need a counter for the smoke route to Claypool because people are already jumping it. So what's the next logical counter for the Bears to use that aggression against the defense?
You guys are going to like this, but it's the old smoky squirrel concept.
Ooh.
It's where you have
tell me more.
One of your receivers go to stop block, right? You pump the smoke screen, which is what Claypool's doing, and then you release that guy who's going to stock block vertical, and you make them pay the price. The Dallas Cowboys are the best team in the NFL at running that. Every once in a while, you'll see I don't know if you guys remember last year when they played the Buccaneers to open the season. I think they opened the season, or maybe it was just one of the primetime games, but they pumped the smoke screen and hit the vertical against Tampa. Those are the kind of concepts that you're going to see come off it. I know Chicago staff is just waiting for the right time to use it because, every OC, the second they see someone jumps it, wants to jump right into that. So to me, that's kind of the next thing off of it is, you motion a guy out there to block for him. Hey, you act like you're stock blocking, you release vertical, you make them pay the price, and then they can't jump it from then on.
Hey, we were talking before. There's a fantastic article, Tim, in an ESPN Plus, written by Seth Wickersham, in depth with Andrew Luck, talking about the psychology of the quarterback position at the NFL level. And I know that you had some time as a pro, and one of the opinions from a former teammate of his was basically saying you almost have to be a sociopath to be a successful NFL quarterback. This obsessive-minded, difficult, perfectionist, detail-oriented, regimented, obsessive. It's really hard to just kind of be a normal person and have it be your job and be good at your job. Is that right? And it just seems like an incredible burden on NFL quarterbacks to have to be of a certain kind of mind to be successful leaders and QBs.
Yeah, listen, I was nowhere near a lot of these guys that I'm commentating on. And what I'll tell you is when it comes to detail-oriented, one of my ex-girlfriend's moms used to joke, she's like, you're so OCD. And I'm like, listen, I'm not OCD, just everything has a place, right? So I think when you look at it, the reality is you have to be regimented. You have to believe in the process. And to me, the sociopath aspect comes from you have to believe that no matter what a majority of people aren't going to think you're doing a good job, and you have to believe you are and that you can, and you have to fight through all this stuff. Like, yeah, I think a lot of what they're saying from the psychological aspect is true. What I see more of with young quarterbacks is starting to believe the outside noise, like when things go wrong, and forgetting who they are and what got them to that level. And I tell you that's a lot of the stuff that I think great coaches remind players of. I think you see it with receivers too, with drops or not being able to create separation. A lot of great coaching is actually just reminding someone who they are, right? And how great they can be if they choose to go and chase it. I think the reality is to perform at the highest level. Like, you could talk about the guy who came back last night and won that game. Tom's been doing it for a really long time. And listen, you never know anyone's personal life, but by and large, it would appear that it's cost him a lot, right, to maintain that level. And there's something to be said about the guys that you're not going to beat. If you were to get on a treadmill together, he's going to die before he gets off, right? There's a lot, that goes into that maybe isn't the healthiest thing. But yeah, I do think there's a lot that goes into it for these guys. I think the guys that can surround themselves with people that are going to pour into them outside of football, in addition to football, are the most successful. When I look at guys like Manziel, I think a lot of it happened where the people that were pouring into him for football and were their coaches were also the guys going out with them and maybe enabling, poor decision-making. And I think I think it's a really fine line. I really do, between having someone teeter that line of these expectations and handling everything correctly and navigating it correctly and being a star, and then having people that enable, because listen, if you're so diabolical and that you care that a 6-yard hitch is exactly at 6 yards because you're going to stress this cover 2 corner, you also probably have some things that if they go off the rails can go in a bad direction. And I just think it's important to make sure these guys are surrounded by really good dudes when it comes to also navigating that, psychological side of it in addition to decision making.
Yeah, and I would imagine that balancing out being able to then coach those players who have to have a high belief system and believe that what I did got me here, but maybe isn't the thing that's going to get me to the next part of what I'm capable of doing.
Yeah, well, what got you here won't get you there always, right? That's a good, I learned that in business when we went from one location to 9, is that you can't, I can't fly all over the country and do it myself, right? You gotta be able to adjust on the fly. I think the reality with these guys is, like a guy like Fields, right? If you were to go to coach him, you want to remind him that he is the best athlete on the field. He can make every throw, but not every situation needs every throw, right? That's kind of the line of coaching to me is you want them ultra confident in that if they have to rip a dagger concept in between 3 guys, they believe they can, but also knowing that on 3rd and 3, hey man, my collect shallow is a heck of an option, right? So I think that's this fine line like you're talking about, where you got to coach these guys and you have to enable the confidence, simultaneously coach them to there's a time and a place for certain throws. But that's also why we sit here and the Bears, you've got to feel great as a fan because Justin's showing all the signs of being a great, but you also got to sit back and be honest about it, is all the things we've touched on, right? The psychology that Luck talked about, where it's like the wear and tear, especially when he talked about the rehab process and all these other things and the details that it takes and this and this. It's why we have 6 good ones, right? It's why we have 6 guys who every fan base would be like, yeah, I'll take him, right? It's just the reality of it is because it's so hard. And I'm a believer that it's the hardest thing on planet Earth, right? Like I think pitching's extremely hard. And I have a bunch of buddies who play baseball and they're always like, no, Tim, pitching is the hardest thing on planet Earth. I'm like, pitching would be up there if the third base coach could tackle you. But the reality is that third base coach is staying over there, right? So we all have the same biomechanic challenges. The only difference is instead of it being a third base coach who might fall over on his way to the mound, it's a 275-pound world-class athlete who wants to bury me, right? Like that's the difference. And it's just what makes it the hardest thing on planet Earth and why there are so many demands physically and mentally.
It's really interesting. It makes me think differently about the infamous comments that Mitchell Trubisky made here in the middle of his struggles of turning off all the televisions at Hallis Hall. And we kind of joked about it, but but I get it. When you're talking about what's being heard and what resonates and how much of a therapist sometimes a coach has to be.
Well, and I think like the other thing that we're not addressing too with the broader context is like a lot of these poor kids had to grow up on social media, right? Like Justin Fields, you really look at him as a player, he was under pressure and under the eye of the public since he stepped on a high school football field. Like, dude, if you had to rehash every dumb thing I did when I was 15, like there's a lot of stuff that these kids have to live in the public eye for so long. And then it's like, you know, we deal with our college athletes where it's like the kids will decommit from a school. And then every time there's some guy in the comments, oh, shows what you know about loyalty. But sure enough, you click his profile, guy's been divorced. I'm like, all right, pal. So I think we're, a little bit, confused on what that word meant. So I don't know. I just think it's like these guys go through a lot to where then, it's not as easy for these kids, in my opinion, as it was for the Peyton Mannings, who didn't necessarily grow up in the public eye. Like they grew up in the public eye when there was like the unwritten rule of, okay, we're not going to expose XYZ about certain people, right? To where it was a lot easier on them. So I think it was easier for them to ignore it or act above it. Whereas a lot of these kids, man, in their formative years, they're under the public eye, which I think just is a whole different, thing that amazes me and how some of these athletes handle it. Because I think Justin's one of those kids where I look at him and it's like, man, you've done it since you were 14 and, you've done all these things and you've taken all these shots from people unfairly. Some criticism is fair, right? And then there's some that it's like, that just, it's like the progression thing. It bothers me so much because there's just, the tape doesn't back it up, right? If you want to say, hey, man, I think his footwork needs to be sped up so that he's more accurate, fine. But if you're going to act like this kid doesn't go through progressions, it's just like it's clear that you just are running with something that just has nothing to do with football or playing the quarterback position, or you just honestly haven't watched a single game.